You may call it winter, but something inside you feels cold. Not dramatic, not tragic, just tired. You wake up. You do what you have to do. You answer messages. You move through your day. And yet something does not bloom. There is effort. There is motion. But there is no warmth. Maybe you have felt this quietly for a long time, a sense that you are trying, but nothing is truly opening. You tell yourself to be patient. You tell yourself to stay positive. You tell yourself that things will change. And still, the air inside you feels heavy. Winter is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the absence of growth. You look around and see other people moving forward, relationships forming, opportunities appearing, doors opening, and you wonder, why does everything feel paused for me? Why does it feel like I am walking through snow while everyone else walks on clear ground? You may think something is wrong with you. Maybe you are not trying hard enough. Maybe you are too quiet, too careful, too late. But what if nothing is wrong? What if you are not broken? What if you are simply standing in a season that has not finished teaching you something? Winter does not destroy the tree. It slows it down. It pulls energy inward. It asks for stillness. And stillness can feel uncomfortable when you are used to movement. You have learned to equate progress with speed. If nothing is happening, you assume something is failing. If no one is calling, you assume you are forgotten. If the answer has not arrived, you assume you asked the wrong question. But winter is not rejection. It is preparation. The ground looks empty in winter, but under the surface, roots are deepening. You do not see them. You do not feel them. But they are working. The problem is not the cold. The problem is panic. Because when you panic in winter, you start digging up your own roots. You start forcing conversations, forcing outcomes, forcing yourself to be someone warmer, louder, brighter. You think if you can just create enough movement, spring will come faster. But spring does not respond to pressure. It responds to readiness, and readiness cannot be rushed. Pause for a moment. Think about the last time you felt anxious. Was it because something terrible happened? Or was it because nothing happened? Because the message did not arrive? Because the result was unclear? Because the silence stretched longer than you expected? Silence can feel like abandonment. Stillness can feel like failure. But stillness is not the same as stagnation. Sometimes you are not stuck. You are simply between seasons. There is a difference. When you are stuck, you feel resistance against everything. When you are between seasons, you feel quiet. Heavy, yes, but quiet. And you may not trust quiet. You may prefer noise, even painful noise, because at least noise feels alive. Winter can feel like nothing is alive. You look at your life and see blank space. You look at your plans and see delays. You look at your relationships and see uncertainty. And uncertainty is uncomfortable. So you try to warm things up. You reach out again. You push harder. You analyze more. You overthink. You tell yourself you are being proactive. But often, you are just afraid of the cold. And fear makes you restless. Restlessness creates tension. And tension freezes things further. Notice this gently, not with judgment, just with awareness. How often do you act because you are inspired? And how often do you act because you are uncomfortable? There is a quiet difference. Inspiration feels light. It feels like moving towards something. Fear feels tight. It feels like moving away from something. Winter is not asking you to freeze. It is asking you to conserve. to stop scattering your energy everywhere, to stop chasing every sign of warmth, to stop measuring your value by visible results. You may have learned that love must be pursued, that success must be chased, that attention must be earned constantly. So when nothing arrives quickly, you assume you must increase your effort. But there is a point where effort becomes pressure, and pressure does not create growth. It creates contraction. Think of a flower. If you pull at its petals to make it open faster, you destroy it. Growth is not accelerated by force. It is supported by conditions. And the first condition is calm. If your inner world is frantic, you are not creating spring. You are extending winter. You may not like hearing that, but this is not blame. It is power. Because if winter is inside, then spring can also begin inside. You do not need permission for that. You do not need external proof. You do not need someone to arrive to declare that the season has changed. You begin by not fighting the cold, by sitting with it, by saying quietly, "This is where I am," not with defeat, with honesty. There is something strong about someone who can admit they feel paused, who can admit they feel tired, who can admit they do not have all the answers yet. That is not weakness. That is grounding. Winter asks for grounding, not performance, not proving, not comparison. Grounding. It asks you to come back to yourself instead of scanning the horizon constantly. You may have spent years looking outward, looking for signs, looking for validation, looking for confirmation that you are on the right path. But winter removes distractions. It removes noise, and what remains can feel uncomfortable. Because what remains is you, without applause, without urgency, without drama, just you. And that can feel lonely. But it is also clean. There is clarity in winter air. Sharp, quiet, honest. You begin to see what you were chasing, and you begin to ask why. Was it truly aligned with you, or was it simply warm? There is a difference between warmth and truth. Warmth can be temporary. Truth sustains. If you are honest, some of the things you tried to force were not deeply right for you. They were just available. They were just convenient. They were just easier than sitting in uncertainty. Winter exposes that. Not cruelly, simply clearly. It shows you where you were bending to avoid feeling alone. It shows you where you were rushing to avoid feeling still. And stillness is not your enemy. It is a teacher, a quiet one that does not shout, one that does not rush, one that waits for you to slow down enough to hear it. You do not have to solve your life tonight. You do not have to decide everything. You do not have to fix the season. You only need to stop fighting it. When you stop fighting winter, something subtle happens. The ground softens, not dramatically, not instantly, but quietly. The tension in your body eases. The urgency in your thoughts slows. You begin to trust that life does not abandon seeds. They are simply hidden for a while. And maybe, just maybe, nothing is missing. Maybe something is forming, out of sight, out of noise, out of pressure. Winter is not the end of your story. It is the pause before a different version of you emerges. Not louder, not more aggressive, just steadier. And steadiness is the first sign that spring is possible. We will not rush it. We will not force it. We will not pretend it is already here. But we will allow the idea that change does not come from panic. It comes from alignment. And alignment begins the moment you stop running from the cold and sit with it long enough to feel your own strength underneath it. Stay here. Do not move yet. There is more beneath this surface, and the thaw begins not with heat, but with permission. You may have noticed something. The moment you start wanting something badly, your body tightens. It is subtle at first. A thought, a possibility, a hope. And then your mind begins to move faster. You imagine the outcome. You imagine the message. You imagine the result. And suddenly, what was calm becomes urgent. You tell yourself it is motivation. But if you look closely, it often feels like pressure. There is a quiet difference between wanting and needing. Wanting is open. Needing is tight. When you want something, you are curious. When you need something, you are afraid. And fear changes your energy. You may not see it, but you feel it. The moment you start needing love, you begin watching more carefully. You reread messages. You check tone. You notice delays. You measure responses. You try to decode silence. And without realizing it, you stop being present. You become strategic. You become cautious. You become slightly anxious. Not because anything is wrong, but because you are chasing warmth. And chasing creates distance. Think about this gently. When have you felt most magnetic? Was it when you were trying hard? Or when you were relaxed? When you were laughing without effort? When you were not thinking about how you were being perceived? There is something powerful about someone who is not chasing. Not because they are cold, but because they are not desperate. Desperation is loud, even when it is silent. It hides behind politeness, behind over-effort, behind constant availability. You may tell yourself you are just being attentive, but if the attention is fueled by fear, it becomes pressure. And pressure rarely attracts. It pushes. You can feel it in your own life. The more you try to force clarity, the more confusion appears. The more you try to secure something, the more unstable it feels. It is like holding sand. The tighter you grip, the faster it slips. But here is the deeper truth. The chase is rarely about the person, or the job, or the outcome. The chase is about what you believe will disappear if you do not catch it. You believe you will lose your chance. You believe you will be forgotten. You believe you will fall behind. So you accelerate, and acceleration feels powerful. For a moment. But underneath acceleration is anxiety. And anxiety creates winter inside your body. Your shoulders tighten. Your stomach contracts. Your thoughts repeat, over and over. What if? What if? What if? What if it doesn't work? What if I missed something? What if I am not enough? And now your actions are not coming from calm. They are coming from fear of loss. When you act from fear of loss, you are not moving towards spring. You are trying to outrun winter. But winter is not behind you. It is within you. And you cannot outrun what you carry. Pause here. Notice how many times in your life you have mistaken urgency for importance. Just because something feels urgent does not mean it is aligned. Sometimes urgency is just fear wearing a mask of productivity. You tell yourself, if I don't act now, I'll regret it. If I don't reply quickly, I'll lose them. If I don't secure this opportunity, I'll fall behind. But what if the rush is the very thing that distorts the outcome? Think about the last time you waited, truly waited, not in anxiety, but in calm. What happened? Often, clarity arrived on its own. Because when you stop pushing, life reveals what was already true. The chase clouds perception. Calm reveals it. You cannot see clearly when your mind is racing. You cannot hear subtle signals when your thoughts are shouting. And most of the damage in relationships does not happen because of conflict. It happens because of pressure. Pressure to define too soon. Pressure to secure too quickly. Pressure to avoid uncertainty. Uncertainty feels cold. It feels like standing in snow without knowing when spring will come. So you try to manufacture warmth. You overtext. You overexplain. You overinvest. You try to speed up what needs time. And time resists being rushed. There is something deeply attractive about someone who is not afraid of time, who does not panic when a day passes, who does not interpret silence as rejection. That person feels grounded, not because they are indifferent, but because they are not chasing. When you stop chasing, you stop negotiating your dignity. You stop adjusting yourself to fit someone else's timeline. You stop performing stability while internally shaking. You become steady, and steadiness feels warm. Real warmth is not dramatic. It is not fireworks. It is not intensity. It is quiet consistency. The problem is that intensity feels exciting. It feels like movement. It feels like passion. But intensity built on fear burns quickly. It cannot sustain. You may have confused chaos with chemistry. You may have confused tension with depth. But tension is not depth. It is friction. And friction exhausts you. The chase keeps you in friction. It keeps you scanning, comparing, anticipating, trying to stay one step ahead. But love is not a race. Neither is success. Neither is life. When you are chasing, you are always slightly behind, because your focus is on catching up. Spring does not chase winter away. It arrives quietly, gradually, without panic, and it does not apologize for the timing. If something in your life requires you to constantly prove your value, constantly secure reassurance, constantly push for clarity, you must ask gently, am I pursuing something real? Or am I pursuing relief from discomfort? Relief feels urgent. Alignment feels calm. The chase is addictive, because it gives you something to do. Stillness forces you to feel, and feeling can be uncomfortable. But feeling honestly is the first step out of winter. When you stop running, you begin to notice where you stand. When you stop pushing, you begin to see who is pushing back. When you stop chasing, you begin to see what stays. And what stays without force is usually what belongs. You do not need to convince something that is meant for you. You do not need to hurry something that is growing. You do not need to compete for what aligns naturally. But you do need to release urgency, not ambition, not desire. Urgency. There is a difference. Desire is warm. Urgency is hot. Heat can burn what warmth would have nurtured. If you are tired, it may not be because you are doing too little. It may be because you are doing too much from a place of fear. Winter deepens when you fight it. It softens when you accept it. The chase keeps you cold, because it keeps you tense. And tension blocks the thaw. Let yourself consider this possibility. What if you did not accelerate? What if you allowed space? What if you trusted that if something requires constant chasing, it may not be meant to stay? This is not about becoming passive. It is about becoming centered. Centered people move, but they do not rush. They act, but they do not panic. They desire, but they do not beg. And when they feel winter, they do not sprint into the snow. They stand still long enough to understand what the cold is teaching them. There is strength in that stillness. Strength that does not look dramatic. Strength that does not need applause. Strength that says quietly, I will not run from silence. I will not chase what is uncertain. I will not shrink to secure warmth. And in that moment, something shifts. Not outside yet, inside. The ground begins to soften. The grip loosens. The breath slows. And the first sign of spring is not external change. It is the absence of panic. Stay here for a moment. Notice what in your life you have been chasing. Notice what has been chasing you. And ask yourself, if you stopped running today, what would remain? Because what remains without force is often the beginning of something real. And something real never needs to be hunted. It waits, calmly, until you are no longer trying to outrun winter. There is something almost invisible that hides inside the chase. Control. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not say, "I am trying to control everything." It whispers something softer. "I just need to understand. I just need clarity. I just need certainty." And certainty feels safe. But here is the quiet truth. Life does not grow in certainty. It grows in trust. And trust feels risky. Control feels intelligent. You tell yourself you are being careful. You tell yourself you are thinking ahead. You tell yourself you are protecting yourself. But look closely. Protection and control are not the same thing. Protection is calm. Control is tense. Protection says, "I know my limits." Control says, "I must manage every outcome." And managing every outcome is exhausting. Think about how often you rehearse conversations in your mind. You prepare answers. You imagine reactions. You calculate timing. You think, if I say it this way, they will respond better. If I wait a little longer, I will seem less eager. If I post this, they might notice. And little by little, your life becomes strategy, not presence. Strategy has its place. But when your heart becomes a battlefield of calculations, you stop feeling. You start managing. Managing your image. Managing perception. Managing risk. And beneath all of that is fear. Fear of being rejected. Fear of being ignored. Fear of losing control. Control promises safety, but it rarely delivers peace. It delivers tension. Because to control something, you must constantly monitor it. You must stay alert. You must stay vigilant. And vigilance never sleeps. Even at night, your mind replays possibilities. Even in silence, you scan for signs. Even in calm moments, you anticipate the shift. This is not strength. It is survival mode. And survival mode feels like winter. Sharp, cold, alert. There is no softness in survival. There is only readiness. But you were not meant to live in constant readiness. You were meant to live in flow. Flow is not passive. It is responsive. Control tries to dictate. Flow listens. Control tightens the grip. Flow opens the hand. And here is the paradox. The more you try to control a person, the less connected you feel. The more you try to control an outcome, the less stable it becomes. It is like trying to command the weather. You can predict it. You can prepare for it, but you cannot force it to change. Winter does not end because you demand it. It ends when the conditions shift, and conditions shift slowly. Control hates slow. Control wants immediate feedback, immediate reassurance, immediate confirmation. But growth is rarely immediate. It is quiet, gradual, subtle. Control also hides in something that looks positive. Self-improvement. You tell yourself, if I become better, everything will stabilize. If I improve enough, no one will leave. If I fix myself, I will never be uncertain again. But what if uncertainty is not a flaw? What if it is simply part of being alive? You cannot control how someone feels. You cannot control timing. You cannot control every opportunity. And when you try, you become rigid. Rigidity blocks warmth. Have you noticed how relaxed people feel different? They are not careless. They are not irresponsible. They simply do not attempt to orchestrate everything. They move with life. They adjust. They breathe. There is a quiet confidence in someone who does not panic when plans shift. That confidence does not come from certainty. It comes from self-trust. And self-trust cannot exist if you are constantly trying to control the outside. Because when you control the outside, you avoid trusting yourself. You believe safety comes from prediction, but real safety comes from adaptability. Winter teaches adaptability. You cannot control the cold, but you can choose how you respond to it. You can layer. You can slow down. You can conserve energy, but you cannot demand sunshine. When you attempt to demand sunshine from people, from circumstances, from life, you create pressure. Pressure pushes people away. Pressure creates resistance. Pressure makes things feel forced. Control often begins as self-defense. Perhaps you once felt blindsided. Perhaps something ended suddenly. Perhaps someone left without warning. And your mind decided, never again. So you started monitoring, analyzing, reading between lines, looking for cracks. But constant monitoring does not prevent pain. It prevents peace. You may think, if I can anticipate the problem, I can avoid it. But anticipation keeps you in tension, and tension blocks connection. You cannot truly connect while evaluating every possible threat. There is something deeply attractive about someone who does not grip tightly, who allows space, who allows mystery, not because they do not care, but because they trust themselves to handle whatever comes. Control is rooted in the belief that you cannot handle loss, that you cannot survive uncertainty, that you cannot adapt, but you have adapted before. You have survived shifts before. You have endured winters before. Why assume this one will destroy you? Control is often a refusal to feel vulnerable, because vulnerability feels exposed, and exposure feels dangerous. But without vulnerability, there is no intimacy. Without vulnerability, there is no growth. Without vulnerability, there is only management. And management is cold. You may have been managing your life for years, managing emotions, managing relationships, managing appearances, managing impressions. But management is not the same as living. Living includes risk. Living includes uncertainty. Living includes not knowing. And not knowing can be beautiful. It leaves space for surprise. Control removes surprise. It replaces wonder with calculation. And calculation rarely leads to warmth. The more you attempt to choreograph life, the more exhausted you become. Exhaustion is a sign that you are gripping too tightly. Let your hands loosen. Not recklessly, gently. Ask yourself, where am I trying to control something that cannot be controlled? Where am I pushing instead of trusting? Where am I forcing clarity instead of allowing it to unfold? Control says, I must secure this. Trust says, if it is aligned, it will remain. Control says, I cannot rest until I know. Trust says, I can rest even while I wait. And waiting is not weakness. It is strength. Strength that does not need immediate resolution. Spring does not erupt. It emerges, slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed at first. The same is true for peace. Peace does not arrive when you finally control everything. It arrives when you stop trying to. You do not need to predict every shift. You do not need to anticipate every change. You do not need to secure every outcome. You need steadiness. And steadiness comes when you release the illusion that you are responsible for controlling the entire climate of your life. You are responsible for your posture, not the weather. You are responsible for your response, not the season. When you stop fighting the sky, you begin to feel the ground beneath your feet. And that grounding is warmer than control ever was. The thaw begins not when you master life, but when you trust yourself enough to live without mastering it. Stay with that thought. Let it settle. You do not need to control the coming of spring. You only need to stop bracing against winter. There is something most people avoid more than failure. Pause. Not quitting. Not giving up. Just stopping. For a moment. And if you are honest, stopping feels dangerous. Because when you stop moving, you start feeling. And feeling is unpredictable. When you are busy, you do not have to ask hard questions. When you are chasing, you do not have to sit with doubt. When you are controlling, you do not have to admit you are tired. But pause removes noise. And without noise, truth becomes louder. You may think your life needs more action, more effort, more clarity. But sometimes what it needs is stillness. And stillness feels uncomfortable at first, because your nervous system is used to motion. Even anxious motion feels safer than quiet. Think about how quickly you reach for your phone when there is silence. How quickly you fill space with conversation. How quickly you make plans so you do not sit alone too long. It is not weakness. It is habit. You have trained yourself to avoid pause, because pause feels like emptiness. But emptiness is not absence. It is space. And space is where change begins. Winter teaches pause. The trees do not argue with it. They do not panic when leaves fall. They do not cling to what has already gone. They stand, still. And in that stillness, something unseen is happening. The roots deepen. The structure strengthens. The system reorganizes. But from the outside, it looks like nothing. And you fear looking like nothing. You fear being perceived as stagnant, as inactive, as behind. So you move, even when moving drains you, even when moving is not aligned, even when moving is just distraction. Pause is not laziness, it is recalibration. It is the moment between breaths when your body resets. Have you ever noticed how different a conversation feels when someone is not rushing to respond? When they actually pause before speaking? There is depth in that space. There is presence. You feel heard. You feel considered. The same is true in your own life. When you pause before reacting, you respond differently. When you pause before sending the message, you choose different words. When you pause before making a decision, you feel what is true. But pause requires courage, because it exposes uncertainty. You may have told yourself that if you do not act quickly, you will miss your chance. But how many times has acting quickly created regret? How many times did you respond from impulse instead of clarity? Impulse feels powerful. Clarity feels quiet. Pause is the bridge between them. Without pause, you live in reaction. With pause, you live in awareness. Awareness is not dramatic. It does not shout. It whispers. And whispers are easy to ignore when you are rushing. There is something else about pause. It reveals what is chasing you. When you stop running, you see what keeps pursuing. Sometimes it is fear. Sometimes it is loneliness. Sometimes it is the belief that you are not enough. And when you finally sit still, those thoughts rise. Not to attack you, to be seen. Winter brings things to the surface. Not to punish you, to clear you. But clearing feels uncomfortable, because it asks you to stop numbing. You may have used busyness to avoid disappointment, used constant effort to avoid rejection, used productivity to avoid stillness. Pause removes those shields. And without shields, you feel exposed. Yet exposure is not the same as danger. It is vulnerability. And vulnerability is where warmth returns. Spring does not burst through frozen ground, it melts it slowly. Pause is that melting. It softens tension. It softens urgency. It softens control. When you pause long enough, you begin to notice patterns. You notice how quickly you assume the worst. You notice how often you interpret silence as rejection. You notice how deeply you tie your value to response. Pause gives you distance, not from life, from distortion. In distortion, everything feels urgent. In pause, everything slows. And in slowing, you begin to see what truly matters. Not every message needs a reply immediately. Not every delay is a warning sign. Not every quiet moment is abandonment. Sometimes it is just life breathing. You are not designed to sprint through every season. There are times for intensity, and there are times for stillness. Confusing the two creates exhaustion. Exhaustion often comes not from doing too much, but from never stopping. Pause is where strength rebuilds. Not visible strength, internal strength. The kind that does not shake when something unexpected happens. The kind that does not collapse when someone withdraws. The kind that does not panic when timing shifts. You may fear that if you pause, everything will fall apart. But consider the opposite. What if constant motion is what keeps things unstable? What if pause is not delay, but alignment? When you pause, you stop forcing. When you stop forcing, you see what moves naturally. And what moves naturally is usually what belongs. Pause also changes your presence. When you are not rushing internally, people feel it. When you are not desperate for outcome, your energy shifts. When you are not gripping tightly, your voice softens. And softness is powerful. Softness does not mean weakness. It means groundedness. The grounded tree does not shake with every wind. It bends. And bending is different from breaking. Pause teaches you to bend, to observe, to wait, to let the moment unfold before deciding what it means. You may discover that much of what you feared was never real. It was anticipation. It was imagination. It was memory repeating itself. Pause interrupts repetition. It gives you space to choose differently, to respond differently, to see differently. Winter feels endless when you fight it. It feels manageable when you accept it. Pause is acceptance in action. It is saying, I do not need to rush this. I do not need to control this. I do not need to chase this. And in that statement, something inside relaxes. Relaxation is not surrender. It is confidence. Confidence that does not shout. Confidence that does not need immediate proof. Confidence that trusts the process without needing to see the end. Spring begins quietly. You rarely notice the first shift. It happens beneath the surface. The same is true for you. The moment you allow pause, the moment you stop reacting automatically, the thaw begins. Not outside, inside. And once the inside softens, the outside eventually follows. You cannot force seasons, but you can stop resisting them. You cannot accelerate growth, but you can create conditions for it. Pause is that condition. Stay here. Feel the space. Feel the quiet. You are not behind. You are not stuck. You are simply in between. And in between is where transformation begins. Do not rush this moment. It may be the most important one, because everything that follows will grow from the quality of your pause. You may not notice it at first. Spring does not announce itself loudly. It does not knock on your door and say, "Everything is different now." It begins almost invisibly. A slightly softer morning, a lighter breath, a thought that feels less heavy than yesterday. The first sign of change is not an event. It is a feeling. After pause, after you stop chasing, after you loosen control, there is a subtle shift. You wake up and something feels less urgent. The message you were waiting for does not arrive. And for the first time, you do not panic. You notice the space, but you do not fill it. That is the first sign. You begin to trust silence. Before, silence meant danger. Now, silence feels neutral, even peaceful. It is not dramatic. It is small. But small shifts change direction. Think about how snow melts. It does not disappear in one moment. It thins, gradually, almost imperceptibly. And then one day, you notice grass. That is how inner change works. You do not wake up transformed. You wake up slightly less reactive. You wake up slightly more steady. You wake up slightly more centered. And that slightly is everything. You may begin to notice that you are no longer checking as often, no longer analyzing every detail, no longer reading into tone. You still care, but you are not clinging. Care without clinging is warmth. Clinging without care is fear. The first breath of spring feels like dignity returning. You stop negotiating your value. You stop adjusting yourself to avoid discomfort. You stop shrinking to secure closeness. And something inside you stands straighter, not aggressively, quietly. There is a calm confidence that replaces urgency. You still want, you still desire, you still hope, but you do not chase. And not chasing changes how people respond to you. Have you noticed how different it feels to speak with someone who is not trying to impress you? Who is not trying to prove something? Who is not scanning your reaction for approval? There is ease. There is space. You feel safe around them. Because they are not gripping. That ease is the first warmth of spring. And when it begins inside you, others feel it. Not because you perform differently, but because you are no longer tense. Tension is loud. Calm is magnetic. The first breath of spring also changes how you interpret things. A delayed response no longer feels like rejection. A changed plan no longer feels like abandonment. You begin to see events without attaching meaning to them immediately. Meaning used to be automatic. Silence means, I did something wrong. Distance means, I am not enough. Uncertainty means danger. Now, you pause before deciding. You allow reality to be neutral until proven otherwise. This is maturity. Not emotional coldness, not detachment. Maturity. Spring is not dramatic emotion. It is steady warmth. And steady warmth does not require constant reassurance. You may notice something else. You are no longer trying to fix yourself constantly. Before, you believed that if you just improved enough, everything would stabilize. You were always optimizing, always adjusting, always editing yourself. Now, there is less urgency to change, not because you stopped growing, but because growth no longer feels like survival. It feels natural, like a tree leaning toward light without being told to. You may also notice that certain dynamics feel different. You may not notice it at first. Spring does not announce itself loudly. It does not knock on your door and say, "Everything is different now." It begins almost invisibly. A slightly softer morning, a lighter breath, a thought that feels less heavy than yesterday. The first sign of change is not an event. It is a feeling. After pause, after you stop chasing, after you loosen control, there is a subtle shift. You wake up and something feels less urgent. The message you were waiting for does not arrive. And for the first time, you do not panic. You notice the space, but you do not fill it. That is the first sign. You begin to trust silence. Before, silence meant danger. Now, silence feels neutral, even peaceful. It is not dramatic. It is small. But small shifts change direction. Think about how snow melts. It does not disappear in one moment. It thins, gradually, almost imperceptibly. And then one day, you notice grass. That is how inner change works. You do not wake up transformed. You wake up slightly less reactive. You wake up slightly more steady. You wake up slightly more centered. And that slightly is everything. You may begin to notice that you are no longer checking as often, no longer analyzing every detail, no longer reading into tone. You still care, but you are not clinging. Care without clinging is warmth. Clinging without care is fear. The first breath of spring feels like dignity returning. You stop negotiating your value. You stop adjusting yourself to avoid discomfort. You stop shrinking to secure closeness. And something inside you stands straighter, not aggressively, quietly. There is a calm confidence that replaces urgency. You still want, you still desire, you still hope, but you do not chase. And not chasing changes how people respond to you. Have you noticed how different it feels to speak with someone who is not trying to impress you? Who is not trying to prove something? Who is not scanning your reaction for approval? There is ease. There is space. You feel safe around them. Because they are not gripping. That ease is the first warmth of spring. And when it begins inside you, others feel it. Not because you perform differently, but because you are no longer tense. Tension is loud. Calm is magnetic. The first breath of spring also changes how you interpret things. A delayed response no longer feels like rejection. A changed plan no longer feels like abandonment. You begin to see events without attaching meaning to them immediately. Meaning used to be automatic. Silence means, I did something wrong. Distance means, I am not enough. Uncertainty means danger. Now, you pause before deciding. You allow reality to be neutral until proven otherwise. This is maturity. Not emotional coldness, not detachment. Maturity. Spring is not dramatic emotion. It is steady warmth. And steady warmth does not require constant reassurance. You may notice something else. You are no longer trying to fix yourself constantly. Before, you believed that if you just improved enough, everything would stabilize. You were always optimizing, always adjusting, always editing yourself. Now, there is less urgency to change, not because you stopped growing, but because growth no longer feels like survival. It feels natural, like a tree leaning toward light without being told to. You may also notice that certain dynamics feel different. Conversations that once made you anxious feel lighter. Interactions that once felt overwhelming feel manageable. And sometimes, people who thrived on your tension seem slightly confused. Because you are no longer reacting the way you used to. You are no longer chasing. You are no longer controlling. You are no longer filling every pause. You are allowing space. And space changes relationships. Some people grow closer when you become steady. Others drift when you stop feeding urgency. This is not loss, it is clarity. Spring reveals what belongs, not by force, but by alignment. You begin to understand that love does not need to be secured. It needs to be experienced. If someone needs to be constantly reminded of your value, they may not see it clearly. And if someone only responds when you push, they may not be aligned with your calm. Spring is selective. It does not bloom everywhere. It blooms where conditions allow it. The first breath of spring also feels like self-respect. You no longer send the second message out of panic. You no longer explain yourself repeatedly to be understood. You no longer overextend to avoid being alone. You remain available, but you remain grounded. Groundedness feels like strength without tension. There is something deeply attractive about someone who is not trying to win, who is not trying to convince, who is not trying to accelerate connection. That person feels whole, not because they have everything, but because they are not scrambling. The scrambling has stopped, and when scrambling stops, clarity rises. You begin to see what truly excites you, what truly drains you, what truly aligns, what never did. Before, fear distorted perception. Now, calm sharpens it. Calm is not passive. It is powerful. It allows you to say no without guilt. It allows you to wait without anxiety. It allows you to walk away without collapse. The first breath of spring is not external success. It is internal steadiness. And steadiness spreads. When you are steady, your decisions change. When your decisions change, your environment shifts. Not overnight, but gradually. You may begin attracting different conversations, different energy, different opportunities, not because you force them, but because you are no longer operating from lack. Lack is cold, wholeness is warm, and warmth is inviting. Notice how your body feels when you are not chasing. There is more space in your chest, less tension in your jaw, less urgency in your breath. That is not accidental. Your body reflects your season. When you were in winter, everything was tight. Now, something loosens. The first breath of spring is physical. It is embodied. It is not theory. It is sensation. You may even notice that your thoughts are less repetitive, less looping, less dramatic. They pass, instead of controlling you. This is freedom, not from life, from inner turbulence. And when inner turbulence quiets, life feels lighter. You begin to enjoy moments without calculating the outcome. You begin to laugh without worrying how it is perceived. You begin to exist without strategizing your existence. And that is rare, because most people are still chasing warmth, still gripping, still trying to outrun winter. But you are learning something different. You are learning that warmth does not come from speed. It comes from alignment. Spring does not need permission. It arrives when the ground is ready. And you are becoming ready. Not because you forced yourself, but because you paused. Because you released urgency. Because you stopped controlling. Because you allowed stillness. That is the secret most people miss. They want the bloom without the thaw. They want the warmth without the surrender. But surrender is not defeat. It is trust. And trust is the first green shoot through frozen soil. Stay with this. Notice the subtle shifts in you. Notice where you no longer panic. Notice where you no longer rush. Notice where you no longer beg. That is not indifference. It is growth. The first breath of spring is not loud. It is a quiet decision. A decision to remain grounded even when the outcome is unclear. A decision to stay steady even when others are anxious. A decision to trust timing instead of forcing it. And when you make that decision, something inside you changes. You stop trying to create warmth. You start embodying it. And embodied warmth does not chase. It attracts. Not because it demands, but because it radiates. Spring is not ahead of you. It is emerging within you. And once it begins, it does not need to be forced. It grows because it is natural, and you are more natural than you have allowed yourself to be. Let that settle. The thaw has begun, and you did not have to fight for it. You only had to allow it. There is something you begin to notice once spring starts inside you. Not everyone is ready for warmth. Some people are comfortable in winter. They do not call it that. They call it realism. They call it independence. They call it strength. But beneath it, there is cold. And cold spreads. You have met people like this. Maybe you did not recognize it at first. They are not openly cruel. They are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are subtle. A joke that cuts slightly too deep. A comment that shrinks your excitement. A silence that feels calculated. They rarely celebrate fully. They rarely soften. They rarely open. You leave conversations with them feeling slightly smaller. Not broken, just diminished. That is cold. Cold does not scream. It numbs. It makes you doubt yourself quietly. And when you were still in winter, you tolerated it. You explained it away. They're just tired. They didn't mean it. They're going through something. Maybe they are. But their winter does not have to become yours. When spring begins inside you, you start feeling temperature differently. You become sensitive to tone, not paranoid, aware. You notice who warms a room and who cools it. Some people carry frost in their voice. It sounds like sarcasm. It sounds like subtle competition. It sounds like backhanded compliments. Must be nice. Good for you. I guess that works for you. On the surface, these phrases look harmless, but they do not feel harmless. They feel distancing, because cold people struggle with other people's warmth. Your growth reminds them of what they avoid. Your calm reminds them of their tension. Your steadiness reminds them of their urgency. And not everyone wants that mirror. Some people prefer chaos. Not because they enjoy suffering, because it feels familiar. Familiar cold feels safer than unfamiliar warmth. You may have once mistaken coldness for depth. You may have believed that intensity meant importance, that tension meant connection, that unpredictability meant passion. But unpredictability often masks instability, and instability is exhausting. When you were chasing, cold people felt exciting. There was friction, there was drama, there was emotional movement. But movement is not the same as growth. Growth feels steady, and steady feels quiet. Cold people often resist quiet because quiet forces them inward, and inward can be uncomfortable. They prefer distraction, conflict, noise. They may withdraw suddenly, not because they are peaceful, but because they punish. They may withhold affection, not because they are reflective, but because they control. They may criticize gently, not to help, but to maintain distance. Cold is strategic. Warmth is open. You begin to see the difference. Cold people do not necessarily hate you, but they struggle when you do not react, when you stop chasing, when you stop proving, when you stop explaining. Because cold dynamics rely on imbalance. They rely on one person leaning forward while the other leans back. When you become steady, that imbalance disappears, and the dynamic shifts. Some will step closer, some will step away. Both outcomes are clarity. Cold also hides in subtle competition. You share something positive. Instead of celebration, you receive comparison. Oh, I did something similar. That's nothing compared to, you think that's hard? Warmth celebrates. Cold competes. Warmth expands. Cold contracts. Warmth says, there is space for both of us. Cold says, there is only room for one. When you are unsure of yourself, You may have tolerated competition. You may have felt the need to defend your position, to prove your worth, to argue your value. But when spring begins inside you, you no longer compete for space. You occupy it calmly. And that calm unsettles cold people. Not because you are aggressive, but because you are not reacting. Cold feeds on reaction. It feeds on emotional spikes. It feeds on insecurity. When insecurity fades, cold loses leverage. You may notice another pattern. Cold people often disappear when you need them most. Not loudly, not dramatically, just subtly. They change the subject. They minimize your struggle. They say, "You'll be fine," without presence. Warmth sits. Cold avoids. Warmth listens. Cold advises quickly. Warmth says, "I'm here." Cold says, "You should." You begin to recognize the difference in how your body responds. With warm people, your shoulders relax. With cold people, your muscles brace. This is not imagination. Your nervous system detects temperature before your mind does. When you were chasing, you ignored that signal. You overrode it. You rationalized discomfort. Now, you trust it. Trusting it does not mean judging people harshly. It means honoring yourself. Not everyone who is cold is bad. Some are wounded, some are guarded. Some have never experienced safe warmth. But their healing is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to protect your climate. Spring is delicate at first. New growth needs protection. Not from storms, from frost. And frost often arrives quietly. In a comment, in a tone, in a withdrawal, in a lack of enthusiasm. You do not need to confront every cold person. You do not need to educate them. You simply need to notice and adjust proximity. Distance is not cruelty. It is discernment. You are not obligated to stand in someone else's winter while your spring begins. Some will accuse you of changing, and you have. Not into someone colder, into someone clearer. Clear people do not over-explain. They do not overextend. They do not overcompensate. They observe. They respond. They remain steady. And that steadiness attracts warmth. Warm people recognize warmth. They respond to calm. They respect boundaries. They celebrate growth. They do not feel threatened by it. You may realize that you once mistook emotional chaos for closeness. Now, chaos feels draining. You crave simplicity, honesty, consistency. Cold often confuses inconsistency with mystery. But mystery does not require instability. True depth does not require withdrawal. True connection does not require tension. It requires safety. And safety is warm. You cannot force someone to leave winter, but you can choose not to build your home there. The more stable you become, the more obvious cold becomes. Not because you are critical, because you are sensitive to temperature. You no longer confuse anxiety with attraction. You no longer confuse scarcity with value. You no longer confuse indifference with strength. And that changes everything. Cold people often thrive when you are unsure, when you doubt yourself, when you chase. But when you stand steady, they either warm up or drift. Both outcomes protect you. Spring clarifies alignment. It reveals who moves toward you when you stop pursuing, who stays present when you stop performing, who softens when you stop reacting. Warmth is not dramatic. It is consistent. It does not fluctuate wildly. It does not disappear suddenly. It remains. And what remains without force is usually real. As you move deeper into your own spring, you will feel less tempted to rescue cold people, less tempted to prove warmth, less tempted to earn affection. You will begin to choose where your energy goes. Energy is climate. You cannot afford to invest it everywhere. Spring is not loud. It is selective. It blooms where it is supported. Let yourself be selective. Let yourself notice temperature. Let yourself choose environments that nourish growth. Cold will always exist. Winter returns each year, but you no longer live there permanently. You know how to feel the shift. You know how to sense warmth. And you know that you do not need to drag anyone into spring with you. Those who are ready will walk toward it. Those who are not will remain where they are. And that is not your burden. You are responsible for your season, for your climate, for your steadiness. The rest will reveal itself naturally. And when you trust that, you stop fearing cold. Because you know you carry warmth within you now. And warmth is stronger than frost. There comes a moment when nothing outside has changed, and yet everything feels different. Not because the world shifted, because you did. This is the quiet turning point most people never notice. It does not look dramatic. There is no announcement, no fireworks, no applause. It feels like this. You stop standing where you always stood, and that changes everything. For a long time, you may have lived from a position you did not even question. The position of waiting. Waiting to be chosen. Waiting to be recognized. Waiting to be understood. Waiting to feel ready. That is a winter position. It looks patient. It feels cautious. But underneath it, there is hesitation. And hesitation keeps you slightly behind your own life. You can work hard from that place. You can love from that place. You can try from that place. But you are always slightly leaning forward, never fully standing. And life responds to where you stand. Not what you say, not what you hope, where you stand. Imagine two people walking into the same room. One enters as if they need permission. The other enters as if they belong. They say nothing different. They look similar, but the energy is different. Position is invisible, but powerful. For years, you may have stood in a position that said, "Not yet. Soon. When I'm more confident. When I'm more successful. When I feel better." That quiet sentence, "not yet," is winter speaking. Winter says, wait. Spring says, step. The shift from waiting to stepping is subtle. It does not require arrogance. It requires ownership. Ownership of your place. Ownership of your voice. Ownership of your direction. You may not even realize how often you minimize yourself, how often you soften your opinion before someone disagrees, how often you apologize for existing loudly, how often you explain your choices as if they need approval. That is a position, and you learned it somewhere. Maybe early, maybe gradually, but it became familiar. Familiar feels safe, even if it keeps you small. Changing position is not loud rebellion. It is internal relocation. You stop standing at the edge of the room. You move to the center of your own life. And the strange thing is, the world reacts. Not because you demand attention, because you no longer shrink. Shrinking is subtle. It happens in tone, in posture, in decision-making, in how long you hesitate before speaking. When winter lived inside you, you were cautious. You scanned reactions. You anticipated rejection. You prepared explanations. That is exhausting, because you are living as if the world is an exam. Spring does not take exams. Spring expands. There is a moment when you realize something quietly powerful. No one is coming to hand you your place. You either stand in it, or you remain outside it. You can wait for certainty, or you can move without it. The people who change their position are not the most confident. They are the ones who get tired of standing back. There is a difference between humility and self-erasure. Humility says, I am open. Self-erasure says, I will disappear so you feel comfortable. You may have called it kindness, but it cost you presence, and presence is your power. When you change position, you stop negotiating your existence. You stop asking, is this okay? You begin asking, is this true for me? That shift is the beginning of authority. Not authority over others, authority over yourself. Winter position looks like this. You take what is given. You accept what is offered. You adjust constantly. Spring position looks like this. You choose, you decide, you redirect. Not aggressively, calmly. You begin noticing how many situations you entered already prepared to compromise, already prepared to reduce yourself slightly, already prepared to lose ground, and you wonder why you feel unseen. You stood in a position of invisibility. Life mirrored it. It is uncomfortable to admit that, because it means you were participating in your own shrinking. But this realization is not blame. It is liberation. If position created the pattern, position can change it. Think about relationships. When you enter them from winter, you hope to be kept. When you enter from spring, you evaluate whether you want to stay. That difference changes everything. From winter, you tolerate. From spring, you choose. From winter, you chase clarity. From spring, you expect consistency. From winter, you over-explain. From spring, you state simply. Changing position means you stop reacting as the person you used to be. It means when tension arises, you do not immediately fold. You pause, you breathe, you stay where you are. That staying is new. Before, you would have moved, adjusted, compensated. Now, you hold your ground, not defensively, steadily. There is something magnetic about someone who does not over-move, who does not over-correct, who does not over-apologize. That magnetism is not performance. It is alignment. Alignment creates gravity. People feel it, even if they cannot explain it. You may have noticed that once you changed internally, certain people began reacting differently. Some respected you more. Some withdrew. Some tested you. That is normal. When you move your position, everyone who was used to the old version must recalibrate. Not everyone will like it, because the old you was easier to manage. The old you was predictable. The new you is centered. Centered people are harder to manipulate, harder to guilt, harder to pressure, because they do not stand in the same spot anymore. Position determines what you tolerate. If you stand in a place of self-doubt, criticism penetrates easily. If you stand in a place of clarity, criticism becomes information. Position determines how deeply words affect you, how quickly you collapse, how long you stay silent. This is why external change often fails. People try to change circumstances without changing position. They change jobs but remain hesitant. They change partners but remain insecure. They change environments but remain small. And then they wonder why patterns return. Patterns follow position. If you stand as someone waiting to be validated, you will attract situations that keep you waiting. If you stand as someone who validates themselves, you begin selecting differently. This is not mystical. It is behavioral. It is energetic. It is subtle. Spring position does not shout, I have won. It says quietly, I am here. And that is enough. There is a quiet test you can ask yourself. When you enter a space, do you feel like a guest or like you belong? Belonging is internal. It is not granted by applause. It is assumed by alignment. Changing position also means changing how you speak to yourself. Winter voice says, be careful. Don't overstep. Don't disappoint. Spring voice says, be honest. Stand steady. Let it unfold. You cannot live in both voices at the same time. One contracts, one expands. Winter is survival. Spring is participation. You survived long enough. Now you participate. Participation means you allow yourself to take up space. Not to dominate, to exist fully. You stop editing your presence. You stop rehearsing every word. You stop predicting every outcome. You move, and you accept that movement carries risk, but staying carries stagnation, and stagnation is slow winter. The truth is, changing position feels strange at first. You may feel exposed, more visible, more responsible, because now, if something does not work, you cannot blame invisibility. You stepped forward. But this is growth. Growth always feels like spring air after winter. Bright, clear, a little sharp, but alive. You are no longer hiding behind potential. You are embodying it. There is a moment when you stop asking, what if I fail? And begin asking, what if I continue standing where I've always stood? That question is transformational, because suddenly you see that safety was limiting you. Safety without growth is cold comfort. Comfortable winter is still winter. Changing position does not mean you never feel doubt again. It means doubt does not move you backward. You feel it, and you remain. You speak, and you remain. You decide, and you remain. Remaining is power, because before you would have shifted. Now you hold. The world recalibrates around people who hold, and slowly, without drama, life begins responding differently. Not magically, logically. Because you are no longer offering the same energy. You are no longer signaling uncertainty. You are no longer apologizing for presence. You are no longer waiting for permission. You have changed position. And when position changes, trajectory changes. You may not see it immediately. Spring never explodes overnight. It unfolds quietly, gradually, persistently. And one day, you look back and realize you are no longer standing where you once were. You are further in, more grounded, more present, more steady. Not because life became easier, because you stopped standing outside of it. That is change. Not external revolution, internal relocation. From the edge to the center, from winter to spring, from waiting to stepping. And once you step, you never fully go back. There is a moment when something inside you changes, and no one else notices. Not at first. You wake up the same. You move through the day the same. You speak to the same people. But inside, there is a different temperature. Winter does not disappear in a single day. It thins, slowly, quietly, almost secretly. And then one morning, you realize something strange. The cold that once defined you no longer reaches your center. This is not excitement. It is not dramatic joy. It is a new feeling. And it feels steady. For a long time, your emotions may have felt like weather. Sudden storms, sudden freezes, sudden heat. One word from someone could drop your temperature instantly. One message not answered could create internal snowfall. One small disappointment could feel like an endless January. But something has shifted. Now when something happens, you feel it, but you do not collapse into it. You observe it. That distance is new. It is subtle, but powerful. It is the first sign that winter no longer controls the climate inside you. Before, you reacted. Now, you respond. Before, your mood moved with every external wind. Now, you remain slightly warmer inside. And that warmth changes everything. This new feeling is not loud. It does not demand attention. It does not crave validation. It feels like this. You trust your own rhythm. You stop rushing answers. You stop forcing clarity. You stop chasing outcomes because something inside you says it will unfold. And for the first time, you believe it. That belief is not naive. It is earned. Earned through silence. Earned through discomfort. Earned through nights when no one was there to reassure you and you had to calm yourself. That is how spring forms. Not from denial of winter, but from surviving it. There is a softness now, but it is not weakness. It is grounded. You no longer need to prove you are strong. You simply are. And that quiet strength creates a new sensation in your body. You breathe differently. You speak slower. You choose your words more carefully. Not because you are afraid, but because you are centered. This new feeling also changes how you experience time. Winter feels urgent. Winter feels like something is running out, like you are late, like everyone else is ahead. But spring does not rush. Spring unfolds in sequence. You begin to notice that the panic you once felt was not truth. It was fear, and fear speaks loudly. This new feeling speaks calmly. It tells you, you are not behind. You are not missing something. You are not failing. For the first time, you feel like your life is not a race, and that realization removes enormous pressure. You stop measuring yourself against invisible timelines. You stop comparing. You stop scanning other people's lives as proof that you are late, because something inside you feels aligned. Alignment feels different from excitement. Excitement is temporary. Alignment is stable. This new feeling also changes your relationships. You listen differently. You do not cling to conversations. You do not overanalyze every pause. You do not assume distance means rejection, because you are no longer afraid of standing alone. That fear used to be winter. Winter whispers, if they leave, you are empty. Spring whispers, if they leave, you remain. That difference is freedom. You begin to notice how much of your past behavior was driven by fear of loss. Now, you are not reckless. You are simply less afraid. And less fear creates space. Space creates clarity. Clarity creates peace. And peace feels new. There was a time when silence felt threatening, when a quiet room felt like exposure, when stillness felt uncomfortable. Now, silence feels safe. You sit with yourself and you do not rush to fill the air. You do not reach for distraction. You do not immediately search for noise. You can stay. That ability to stay is maturity, not age, not experience, inner stability. This new feeling also changes your reaction to uncertainty. Before, uncertainty felt like danger. Now, it feels like openness. You no longer need guarantees before you move. You move and let life meet you halfway. There is something deeply attractive about someone who moves without desperation. Desperation smells like winter. Calm movement smells like spring. You may not notice it immediately, but others do. They feel your steadiness. They sense that you are not chasing. They sense that you are not begging for approval. And that shifts dynamics around you. The new feeling is not about becoming someone else. It is about removing the constant tension that once lived inside you. Tension used to be normal. Tension used to feel productive. Tension used to feel necessary. But tension is winter's language. It keeps you contracted. Spring expands without tension. Expansion does not require force. It requires trust. And trust is growing in you. You begin to trust your decisions, even when they are unpopular, even when they are misunderstood. even when they lead into the unknown. You trust your ability to adjust. And that self-trust is the deepest warmth. It spreads quietly into your posture, into your tone, into your choices. You stop explaining yourself excessively. You stop defending every decision. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. Because you are no longer trying to secure your place. You know your place. It is within you. This new feeling also changes how you experience love. Love no longer feels urgent. It feels intentional. You do not chase intensity. You notice consistency. You do not seek drama. You seek depth, and depth requires stability. Winter love feels chaotic. Spring love feels steady. You begin to prefer steady, because steady does not exhaust you. It supports you. And if someone brings chaos into your calm, you notice it faster. You feel the drop in temperature. You feel the old patterns trying to return. But now, you have awareness. Awareness is warmth. It prevents you from slipping back into frost. This is the most powerful part. You no longer need to be different to feel worthy. You no longer need to achieve something to feel enough. You no longer need someone else to confirm your value. The confirmation is internal, and internal confirmation cannot be taken away. It is not dependent. It is cultivated. Cultivated through patience, through solitude, through facing the cold without running. This new feeling is quiet confidence. Not loud, not flashy, not performative. It is a steady knowing, a grounded presence, a calm center. And from that center, you begin to live differently. You choose differently. You speak differently. You tolerate less. You expect more, not from arrogance, from clarity. Clarity feels like morning light after a long winter. Not blinding, just clear. You see things as they are. You see people as they are. And most importantly, you see yourself as you are. Without exaggeration, without minimization, without distortion. This is new, and new can feel unfamiliar. There may be moments when you miss the intensity, when you miss the rush, when you miss the dramatic highs and lows. Because winter was loud, spring is steady. But steady is sustainable. Sustainable is powerful, because it lasts. You are no longer living in survival mode. You are living in participation mode. You participate in your own life instead of reacting to it. You make decisions without waiting for crisis. You speak before resentment builds. You rest before exhaustion forces you. You say no before collapse. That prevention is maturity. This new feeling is not the end of growth. It is the beginning of stability. And stability allows deeper growth. You are no longer rebuilding from ruins. You are building from foundation. Foundation is invisible, but everything rests on it. Winter tested your foundation. Spring strengthens it. And as this new feeling settles in, you realize something profound. You are not chasing warmth anymore. You are carrying it. You are not waiting for light. You are standing in it. You are not hoping for change. You are embodying it. That embodiment is transformation, not explosive, not dramatic, but undeniable. And the most powerful part is this. Once you experience this new feeling, you cannot unfeel it. You cannot go back to believing you are powerless. You cannot go back to believing you are incomplete. You cannot go back to winter as identity. Winter may return as season, but not as home. Spring is now within you. And when spring lives within you, no external cold can fully take it away. That is the new feeling. Steady, quiet, strong, alive. And once it begins, it does not disappear. It grows. There's something you must understand about spring. It does not ask for permission. It does not argue with winter. It does not try to prove that it deserves to arrive. It simply comes. And the moment it does, everything that once felt permanent begins to shift. But here is the quiet truth. Spring does not last forever. And that is not a tragedy. It is a reminder. While warmth is here, you must move. While clarity is present, you must decide. While you feel steady, you must act. Because every season carries its own opportunity. Winter is for survival. Spring is for movement. And if you waste spring waiting for perfect certainty, you will find yourself in cold again. Not because you failed, because you hesitated. There is a window when your heart feels lighter, when your mind feels clearer, when your steps feel stronger. That is not random. That is readiness. And readiness is fragile if ignored. You know the feeling. You wake up and something inside you feels possible. You feel slightly braver, slightly less afraid, slightly more willing. That is spring speaking. It does not shout. It whispers, now. But most people do not move when it whispers. They wait until it screams. And by then, the moment has passed. While spring lives inside you, your decisions carry different weight. You respond differently to opportunity. You do not overthink every possibility. You do not imagine every disaster. You allow yourself to move forward without building a fortress first. That is the gift of spring. Movement without panic. But this window does not stay open forever. If you ignore your own readiness, if you suppress your own expansion, winter creeps back quietly, not as punishment, as consequence. Life responds to momentum. Momentum must be used when it exists. There is something powerful about acting while your inner climate is warm. Conversations feel easier. Boundaries feel clearer. Choices feel simpler. You are less afraid of outcomes. That is the time to shift your direction. Not recklessly, intentionally. Spring energy is not chaos. It is alignment in motion. You may have noticed this before. There were moments when you felt capable, when you felt open, when you felt ready to speak or change something. And instead of acting, you delayed. You told yourself, later. I need more time. I'll think about it. And slowly, the courage cooled. The clarity dimmed. The opportunity softened, until it felt distant again. That is how winter returns. Not through disaster, through postponement. While spring is present, you must trust your instinct. Not every instinct. The grounded one, the calm one, the one that does not scream, the one that feels steady. That voice says, this is aligned. This is right. This is time. There is a reason why growth often happens in small windows. Because courage is seasonal. It rises. It peaks. It requires action. If you ignore it, fear regains strength. You begin doubting again. You begin shrinking again. You begin overanalyzing again. Spring is expansion. Winter is hesitation. You cannot expand while hesitating. The two cannot coexist. While your internal weather is warm, make the call. Send the message. Set the boundary. Change the routine. Speak the truth. Move toward what you want. Because once the temperature drops, those same actions will feel heavier. This is not pressure. It is awareness. Every season offers something. Spring offers momentum. Use it. There is something magnetic about someone who moves when they feel ready. Not because they are fearless, because they trust timing. Trust in timing means recognizing when fear is low, recognizing when clarity is high, recognizing when hesitation has loosened. You may feel that looseness right now, a subtle sense that you are capable of more, that something is shifting, that something is possible. Do not ignore that. Do not downplay it. That sensation is earned. It came from surviving winter. It came from enduring silence. It came from holding yourself steady when no one else did. You did not go through that to remain still. While spring is here, act from it, not impulsively, but decisively. There is a difference. Impulsiveness is chaotic. Decisiveness is calm. Spring is calm courage. It does not rush, but it does not freeze. You might ask yourself, what have I been postponing? What conversation have I delayed? What change have I softened? What truth have I avoided? If your internal temperature feels warmer, that is your moment. Speak gently. Move steadily. Choose clearly. Because later may not feel the same. There is also another truth. While spring is here, you must build structure, not just emotion. Motivation fades, discipline sustains. If you feel inspired, create habits. If you feel confident, create boundaries. If you feel aligned, create plans. Because plans built in spring protect you in winter. Winter will return, not as identity, as season, life cycles. But if you use spring wisely, winter will not break you. It will test what you built. That is different. There is something empowering about knowing that warmth is temporary. It forces appreciation. It forces movement. It forces participation. While you feel connected to yourself, connect deeper. While you feel steady, make commitments. While you feel courageous, take steps. Do not wait for perfection. Perfection is an illusion winter uses to stall you. Spring asks only for honesty. Are you ready? If the answer is even slightly yes, move. You do not need full certainty. You need alignment. Alignment feels grounded. It feels clean. It feels clear. That clarity is your invitation. There will always be reasons to wait. There will always be excuses to delay. There will always be fears to justify hesitation. But spring does not argue with fear. It walks forward quietly. You must choose which voice to follow. There is something beautiful about acting from readiness. You feel less regret. You feel less resentment. You feel more ownership. Because you did not let opportunity slip through hesitation. Even if outcomes are uncertain, you feel stronger for having moved. Movement creates confidence. Confidence creates resilience. Resilience creates stability. And stability sustains you through future winters. While spring is alive inside you, use your energy wisely. Do not waste it on proving yourself. Do not waste it on chasing approval. Do not waste it on people who drain your warmth. Protect it, direct it, invest it. Spring is not endless, but it is powerful. And every time it returns with new potential. The question is not whether spring will come again. It will. The question is what you do while it is here. Will you stand still waiting for perfect conditions? Or will you move while clarity supports you? There is no dramatic countdown, no alarm, just a quiet knowing. If you feel that knowing now, listen. Do not overthink it. Trust your growth. Trust your survival. Trust your readiness. And step. Because the most painful winters are not the coldest ones. They are the ones that follow unused spring. While warmth is here, build. While clarity is here, decide. While courage is here, move. And when winter eventually returns, you will not fear it. Because you will know you did not waste your spring. And that knowledge is strength. Spring is not about comfort. It is about momentum. And momentum must be honored. While you can feel it, act from it. Because seasons change. But those who move with them do not get left behind. They evolve. And evolution is the real gift of spring. While it lives inside you, let it change you. Completely, deliberately, without delay. There comes a moment when you no longer feel the need to understand everything, not because life became simple, but because you became steady. At the beginning, there was winter, cold thoughts, tight breath, a constant sense that something was missing. You tried to fix it. You tried to control it. You tried to outrun it. You tried to warm yourself through effort. But effort cannot replace alignment. Winter stayed until you stopped fighting it, until you stopped pretending you were not cold, until you admitted you were tired. And in that admission, something softened. That was the beginning, not the solution, the beginning. You learned to pause. You learned to sit. You learned to breathe without needing an answer. You learned to exist without performing. And slowly, almost without noticing, the temperature shifted. It did not explode into spring. It lightened. There was less urgency, less panic, less noise. You stopped chasing warmth. You started carrying it. And now, here you are, not transformed into someone new, but returned to yourself. This is the quiet truth many people search for in dramatic ways. Nothing outside you had to change first. The shift was internal. You stopped standing against life. You started standing within it. There is something deeply peaceful about no longer needing to prove that you are healing. You are not forcing growth. You are not measuring progress. You are not comparing seasons. You simply are. And that being is enough. Winter may come again. It always does. There will be days when doubt returns, when silence feels heavy, when clarity fades. But now you know something you did not know before. Seasons pass, not because you control them, because they move. You are no longer afraid of the cold. You are no longer desperate for the sun. You trust the cycle. That trust is maturity. There was a time when you thought stability meant constant happiness. Now you understand it means balance. Balance is quiet. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It feels like this. You wake up and your mind is not racing. You move through your day without scanning for danger. You rest without guilt. You speak without rehearsing. You let people come and go without losing yourself. That is stability. You are not clinging to spring. You are not resisting winter. You are participating in life as it unfolds. And that participation feels light. There is a deep relief in no longer needing life to look a certain way. You no longer demand perfect timing, perfect people, perfect clarity. You move gently. You decide calmly. You release quietly. There is something powerful about quiet strength. It does not intimidate. It does not overwhelm. It steadies. And when you are steady, others feel safe around you. Because you are no longer reacting to every shift. You are grounded. You may look back now at the version of yourself who was tense, who was chasing, who was holding tightly. And you do not judge that version. You understand it. That version was surviving. You are no longer surviving. You are living. Living feels softer. It feels less urgent. It feels more spacious. There is room for mistakes, room for pauses, room for silence, room for change. You do not need to force growth. Growth happens naturally when you are not resisting it. And you are no longer resisting. You are open. Open does not mean vulnerable to harm. It means available to experience. You allow joy without gripping it. You allow sadness without fearing it. You allow uncertainty without panicking. This is peace, not the absence of problems, the absence of constant internal war. You have stopped fighting yourself. And when that fight ends, life feels lighter. There is something beautiful about reaching a place where you do not need to be rescued. Not because you reject help, because you trust yourself. You trust your ability to endure. You trust your ability to adapt. You trust your ability to begin again. That trust is your foundation. No season can remove it. Winter may test it. Spring may expand it. But it remains. You are no longer chasing identity. You are embodying presence. Presence is simple. It is not dramatic. It is not intense. It is steady awareness. You breathe in. You breathe out. You feel your body grounded. You feel your mind quieter. You feel your heart open, but not desperate. This is not a climax. It is integration. Everything you moved through has settled into you. You do not need to revisit it. You do not need to analyze it endlessly. You have absorbed the lesson. You know now that nothing external can complete you, and nothing external can erase you. You are not fragile in the way you once believed. You are flexible. Flexible things do not break easily. They move with the wind. They bend without snapping. That flexibility is strength. And so, as this cycle completes, you do not rush forward. You do not rush backward. You remain. There is something deeply calming about remaining present, remaining aware, remaining connected to yourself. You do not need a dramatic ending. You do not need a final revelation. You simply need this: the quiet understanding that you are capable of meeting every season. Winter will not destroy you. Spring will not define you. You carry both. And that balance is maturity. So now, as everything settles, you do not chase. You do not control. You do not panic. You breathe. You allow. You trust. And in that trust, there is freedom. Not loud freedom. Not rebellious freedom. Grounded freedom. The kind that does not require applause. The kind that does not require explanation. The kind that feels like standing in open air without needing to move. You are not finished growing. You are not finished changing. But you are no longer fighting the process. You have stepped into it. And that is enough. Seasons will come. Seasons will go. But you will remain. Steady. Aware. Alive. And when the next winter arrives, you will not fear it. Because you have already seen what comes after. Spring is no longer a hope. It is a certainty. And certainty brings peace. So rest here. Not in excitement. Not in urgency. In calm. In presence. In quiet strength. This is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of living it differently. Without resistance. Without desperation. Without fear of seasons. Just you. Steady. Whole. Present. And finally, at home within yourself.